o'clock. So we will go ahead and get started here shortly. Welcome to our Back to School 2016 webinar. This webinar is intended to really take you through the full spectrum of updates in education for children and youth who are experiencing homelessness. My name is Barbara Duffield. I am the Director of Policy and Programs for the National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth, and I will let my two co-presenters introduce themselves, starting first with Cyekeia.
Hi everyone, this is Cyekeia Lee, NAEHCY's Director of Higher Education Initiatives.
And hello everyone, this is Patricia Julianelle, and I am NAEHCY's Director of State Projects and Legal Affairs. Welcome to the webinar.
Before we get going, I want to make sure everybody knows that if you go into the materials folder on your GoToTraining, you will find a copy of this webinar to download. This is intended to be yours to use, so feel free to download it and use the information as you would like. For those of you who are new to NAEHCY, just a real quick review. We are a national membership association dedicated to educational excellence for children and youth who are experiencing homelessness. We work from early childhood through higher education. We have local homeless youth task forces across the country, many statewide higher education networks, and a very active early childhood committee. We provide technical assistance on policies such as we are doing today, and we also work in the advocacy arena, bringing your voices to Congress and state legislatures, and we work throughout all of this to include the voices of young people and families who are experiencing homelessness. Just to give you an overview for what we've got on tap today, we have some big news across the educational spectrum. We have new Head Start and early Head Start regulations that were just announced last week, and in fact were just published yesterday in the Federal Register. We have an update on the Every Student Succeeds Act and the amendments to McKinney-Vento in Title I. We'll look just real briefly at the status of the guidance and regulations, a brief review of the major changes in the law. We have a more in-depth webinar tomorrow on ESSA and many other materials that we'll go over. And we also want to let you know about some of the new implementation and training resources that are available. We'll then turn to higher education, and Cyekeia will fill us in on some very timely updates regarding the new October FAFSA, prior year income, and also some updated training resources for higher education too, as well as our Home for the Holidays campaign. So we hope that you'll see, no matter where you are in your place of work, if you're working in early childhood, you certainly may have parents who need and want a higher education, want to go to college, and the FAFSA information will be very important for them. If you're working in higher education, you may have young parents with children who would benefit from Head Start. So, and if you're working in a K-12 school system, you now have legal responsibilities with respect to both programs, with respect to financial aid and higher ed. So wherever you are, we hope that this webinar will provide you news you can use. So I'll get started with the news on the Head Start and early Head Start regulations. For those of you who've been doing this work for a while, you may remember that the actual legislation was reauthorized back in 2007 and included many provisions for homeless children and families. But some of the most important provisions in the law were subject to regulations, and those regulations did not get published until just this week. So we have essentially what is like a whole new reauthorization with Head Start, because the Head Start performance standards, which is what the regulations are called, are very important, and they guide the operation of Head Start programs and services as well as early Head Start. So just to let you know that the regulations that we'll describe in this webinar will go into effect on November 7th. If you want a link to the full regulations, you have the link there. If you want a link just to the summary of the homeless provisions, there's another link that will take you to sort of a plain English version summary, and at the bottom of the plain English summary is a PDF document that gives the citations and gives the complete picture. So you really have two resources there on the Head Start regulations. we want to cover just the highlights of those. Again, there are more, but just to give you some of the highlights. First of all, children who are homeless, as defined by the same definition that we have in the education subtitle of McKinney-Vento, are categorically eligible for Head Start. What that means, in essence, is that homeless families do not need to prove income to be eligible for Head Start. They are eligible by virtue of meeting that definition of homelessness. Head Start programs are required to keep records for every eligible child in the program, but the Head Start performance standards that were released this week give some very, very easy ways for Head Start program staff to do that. Head Start program staff are allowed to establish homelessness through a number of different alternative means: written statements from homeless service providers, school personnel, any document that indicates homelessness, a declaration, information gathered from enrollment or application forms, or even notes from an interview with staff. So while Head Start staff do need to keep a record of how they determined eligibility for a child, there's a number of different ways that they can do that. And again, there's more to it, and you can look at the summary on our website if you want to read the fine details on that. The other piece that we want to cover here concerns the needs assessment. Needs assessments for Head Start programs are very important because they help the Head Start programs establish their priorities for services, for enrollment and services. So these regulations require Head Start programs to conduct a community needs assessment at least once over the 5-year grant period, and they require that the needs assessment use data on children experiencing homelessness, and including, to the extent possible, from McKinney-Vento education liaisons. You'll see in the next slide why this is so important, but again, the needs assessment has to include data on homelessness, and to the extent possible, in collaboration with liaisons. We know that school systems are often the only systems that are keeping track of children who are experiencing homelessness, particularly in areas where there are no shelters. Shelters are full. There are rules on who can stay in the shelter, so the school district will know more about homelessness, including for young children, often than any other entity in the community. The Head Start programs also need to update their community needs assessment to review significant changes. They need to update those assessments annually, including rates of family and child homelessness. So this is not only once in the 5-year period, it's also every year. So very important to be in touch with your Head Start programs, because as we go to the next slide, Head Start programs, if the needs assessment shows homelessness, if the needs assessment makes the case for it, they are now allowed to reserve enrollment slots for children who are homeless or in foster care. They cannot hold more than 3% of the program's funded enrollment, but they can reserve up to 3% of the program's funded enrollment for children who are experiencing homelessness or in foster care. If the reserved slot isn't filled within 30 days, then the enrollment slot is vacant and must be filled. This policy is absolutely, this is one of the ones that we advocated for very, very strongly for a long time, because for so many children who are highly mobile, Head Start programs are full. They fill up at the beginning of the year. If they're full, then there can be literally no way to get in. Even if you're at the top of the wait list, if that wait list is long enough, you may not get into the program. So to be able to plan for mobility, for mobile children, and be able to hold slots to accommodate them is one of the most important ways that Head Start program can accommodate the needs of children who are homeless. But it needs to be a policy. It needs to be a policy decision that's made based on information in the needs assessment. So now is the time to renew your partnerships with your Head Start programs, share with them your data, and see what kind of policies can be worked out so that this new flexibility is used to the advantage of children and families who are experiencing homelessness. A couple other pieces: Head Start programs are required to implement a recruitment process to let all eligible families know about the availability of services and encourage them and assist them to apply for the program. And those recruitment efforts now must include specific efforts to actively locate and recruit children who are homeless and children in foster care. So there is yet another way where you can be of assistance, whether if you're a homeless service provider, no matter where you are in the spectrum, to help Head Start programs really develop a good recruitment process that does find homeless families and help them apply to the program. This next slide here goes into new regulations, new policies that are very McKinney-Vento-esque. As you will see throughout this, there's an alignment between the Head Start policies and the McKinney-Vento policies, including with ESSA. So although the programs are not identical and they have different funding streams and different ways they operate, there's an alignment for policies for children who are homeless. So first of all, Head Start programs must make efforts to maintain the enrollment of homeless children, regardless of whether the family or child moves to a different service area or transition the child to a program in a different area according to the family's needs. You can see this is very similar to school of origin and immediate enrollment. It's not exactly the same, but again, making every effort to keep the family in the service area or, depending on their needs, transition them to a new area. So we do have a parallel policy here. Also, if families and children are going to be moving out of the area in which they're served, Head Start programs are required to make special efforts to support effective transitions to Head Start and early Head Start. But if those programs aren't available, then the program should assist the family to identify another early childhood program that meets their needs. So we're looking at, again, keeping children in Head Start as continuously as possible, and if they do have to move, helping them transition to another program expeditiously. In terms of the enrollment policies, Head Start programs do have to comply with state enrollment and attendance requirements, immunization policies, with the exception of homeless children. So there's an explicit exception for homeless children in terms of the state policies. And in addition to that, Head Start programs must now allow homeless families to attend Head Start for up to 90 days without their immunization and other medical records or the other documents in order to give families reasonable time to present these documents. We know that families who are moving around a lot may not have everything with them. They leave in crisis. They have to move in crisis, and so it may be challenging for them to get everything they need right up front. This now establishes a 90-day grace period, regardless of what state policy says, to allow for the quick enrollment of children and youth, or of children who are homeless in Head Start programs. In addition, there's a broader policy that applies for all families, not just families who are homeless, that Head Start policies and procedures can't require families to provide documents that confirm a child's age if doing so presents a barrier for the family to enroll. So that will be true for all families, including homeless families. And the next provision looks at transportation. There is not the same kind of transportation requirements that there is in McKinney-Vento, but there is now at least a new requirement that Head Start programs must utilize community resources where possible to provide transportation if a homeless child is unable to attend classes regularly because they do not have transportation to and from the program facility. So for the first time, we do have a policy on the book about Head Start requirements with respect to transporting children who are homeless. We will get into the ESSA presentation a little bit later, but I just want to flag here that Head Start programs that are administered by school districts will be subject to McKinney-Vento. So they will have school of origin transportation requirements. The LEA ultimately has the obligation to provide that transportation, but all Head Start programs, including those that are not administered by school districts, must utilize community resources where possible to provide that transportation if that is a reason that a homeless child can't attend classes regularly. I'm going to go back for just a second on Head Start, and just before I transition over to Patricia, I neglected to mention that for those of you who are new to the issue or unfamiliar with Head Start, one of the reasons we are so excited about these regulations is because Head Start is such a perfect match for families who are experiencing homelessness. Head Start provides comprehensive services, very much includes families, helps parents meet their goals. So in many ways, it is the perfect match for families who are experiencing homelessness. We know that with these new regulations, there's going to be lots of needs for training and technical assistance. So we'll have some new materials out for you shortly about that. But just again, really encourage you to either initiate or renew your partnerships with your Head Start programs in your area and let them know that you have children who are homeless and you can help them with this rollout. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Patricia.
Thanks, Barbara. I want to mention that we have seen questions coming into the chat box. Please do keep sending in your questions. We're going to stop and respond to your questions a little bit later in the presentation, but we're cataloging them and we'll definitely get back to you, so keep sending those in. What we're going to do at this point is transition from Head Start to the K-12 education system before we move up to higher ed. So we're going to talk about the Every Student Succeeds Act. What you're going to get over the next few slides is a very brief overview of the changes. We're offering a webinar tomorrow that goes into a lot more detail on ESSA, and of course we've got lots of materials on our website that we'll talk about a little bit later. But I just want everyone to know this is not going to be an in-depth Every Student Succeeds Act presentation, but we will give you some ideas of what to look for and what some of the most important changes are. So for those of you who aren't so familiar with this, the Every Student Succeeds Act, of course, was passed in December of last year. It amends the McKinney-Vento Act. It also amends Title I and the other education programs that are part of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. The effective dates for different pieces of ESSA are kind of all over the place. It gets a little confusing. We do have one pager that goes over all the effective dates on our website. But the amendments to the McKinney-Vento Act take effect actually in just a couple weeks here on October 1st, 2016. That's true of all of the changes in the McKinney-Vento Act with the exception of the removal of the phrase awaiting foster care placement from the definition of homelessness. Awaiting foster care placement is going to be removed from the definition of homeless effective December 10th, 2016, so just a few months from now, and that is the case in every state except for Arkansas, Delaware, and Nevada, and in those three states, awaiting foster care placement will be removed from the definition on December 10th, 2017. If you're still following us on all these dates, the Title I provisions related to education for children and youth in foster care. If you're familiar with those are some extra provisions in the state plan and local plans for Title I. Those go into effect on December 10th of this year. You'll notice they go into effect the same time as awaiting foster care placement comes out of McKinney-Vento. And the rest of the Title I provisions, including those related specifically to children and youth who are homeless, will go into effect for the 2017-18 school year. So we have a staggered rollout. There's also been some guidance issued related to both ESSA, Title I, and McKinney-Vento. The Department of Education, of course, does have the authority to issue non-regulatory guidance on the McKinney-Vento Act pieces of ESSA and some of the Title I pieces. So while that's not binding, that's not actually a law that school districts or states have to follow, it does provide some guidance about the Department of Education's interpretation of different provisions. In July, on July 27th, the Department of Education issued its guidance on the McKinney-Vento Act amendments. And in June, on the 23rd, the department issued its guidance on the foster care provision. So again, we'll show you a little bit later the websites of where you can download those if you want to read the guidance in full. The McKinney-Vento guidance has some really great information there about implementing the McKinney-Vento Act. So on your screen right now, you see kind of a laundry list of all the different amendments to the McKinney-Vento Act that were made by ESSA. It's a long list, and there were a lot of changes made. Many of you are probably already implementing a lot of the changes in your states and school districts already. So some of these, when you hear them or when you read them, you're just going to say, well, we've already been doing that. Many of the amendments really were just that. They were just taking best practices that were already in place around the country and putting them in the law so that every school district could benefit from the best practices that had been developed in some places. So while it's a long list, the impact on your particular school district probably will depend a lot on how dynamic the McKinney-Vento program has been in past years and what's already been in place in your community. So we're going to go over just a few of these now, and then again, as I said, you can find more information on our website on all the details. So in terms of the implementers of the McKinney-Vento Act, both at the state level and the local level, in terms of your state coordinators, of course, every state must designate a state coordinator. That's not new. The new piece from ESSA is that each state coordinator must be able to sufficiently carry out their duties. So that's getting at issues like time, capacity, authority, the real ability of that state coordinator to do all of the things that are listed in the law that they're required to do. And there are some additions to that list of duties. So again, we're not going to go over all of those, but state coordinators now are required to conduct monitoring of local educational agencies and their compliance with the McKinney-Vento Act. And that is true of both funded districts and unfunded LEAs. So that monitoring is statewide. States are required to post information on the website with all the liaisons' contact information in the state so that people know who to contact in their local areas, the duties of the liaison, and also data on student homelessness in the state. And in addition, state coordinators are now required to respond to inquiries from homeless parents and unaccompanied youth. I think all state coordinators were already doing this, but it's now a requirement for them to do it and to ensure that parents and youth receive the full protections of the McKinney-Vento Act. So an increased emphasis there on compliance and monitoring and really doing outreach to make sure that the law is in place all over the state. Liaisons also have some new duties, and they also have a new requirement, like state coordinators, that each liaison must be able to carry out his or her legal duties. The law doesn't define what able to means, but clearly it means that the liaison has the capacity, the time, the training, the ability to carry out the duties that are listed in the law. And the Department of Education guidance does expand on that a little bit. Liaisons, as always, are there to ensure that our McKinney-Vento students can enroll in school, that they have full and equal opportunity to succeed in school. There is the requirement for identification. So I noticed a question earlier in the chat box about what is required in regards to reporting homelessness. Every local educational agency does need to identify all of its children and youth who are experiencing homelessness. They do need to collect data on all of those students, and they do need to report all of those to the state, regardless of whether those students are receiving services. Sometimes there are parents who actually refuse services. They don't want to be identified as homeless or receive those services, but the school district still needs to identify them and report that data. And a requirement that I'm really excited about is now liaisons are required to ensure that school personnel providing McKinney-Vento services receive professional development and other support. So many of the liaisons around the country have already been doing professional development within their LEAs and their school districts, but there may be problems sometimes with getting all the right people at the table, all the right people to come to the training. Maybe you're trying to get that 10 minutes at the principal's meeting, but you're having some trouble getting that 10 minutes. You now have a requirement that you must do that. And so hopefully that will be helpful to eliminate some of those barriers that liaisons have been facing as they've been trying to provide the training and the professional development to all levels within their school buildings and school districts. School stability, there are a number of amendments here. Some of them are really just, again, putting into the law what's been in place around the country for many, many years now, while others of the changes are a little bit more significant. So you can see on the slide, and actually I should have mentioned this before, the blue language on your slides is language that has been in the law at least since 2001 with the No Child Left Behind Act, and the red or dark brown color there is new language that was put in place just with ESSA. So you see on school stability, there's a lot of blue on the slide. Students do still have the right to remain in the school of origin or enroll in any public school that house students living where the student is living are eligible to attend. But we now have a change in the definition of school of origin. So school of origin is the school attended when the child was permanently housed or the school in which the student was last enrolled. That definition now specifically includes preschools, and it includes the designated receiving school at the next grade level for feeder schools. So the right to remain in the school of origin, as you know, is good for the entire time that a student is experiencing homelessness. That can cross over school years from one school year to the next. We'll get into that in a minute about how you make those determinations. But when you're looking at a student who's finishing out the last grade in a school building, maybe sixth grade in that elementary school, and trying to determine what school that child will attend for seventh grade, if your LEA has designated receiving school, so everybody from sixth grade at McKinney Elementary goes to seventh grade at Vento Middle School or Vento Junior High, if that's a pattern that is designated for all students, then McKinney-Vento students also will have the right to follow that same pattern. You know, some districts just don't have designated receiving schools. And if that's the case, then this provision really wouldn't apply in your LEA. In terms of preschool, as you can see there on your slide, there's no definition of preschool in the law. We also don't really have a definition in the guidance from the Department of Ed, but there is a definition in the data collection information that the Department of Education puts out. And I'll put that into the chat box a little bit later. But essentially, any preschool that is LEA administered, so that the LEA is an administrative agent, a financial agent, even if the funding is mixed and coming, a little bit from the LEA and perhaps a little bit from Head Start or a little bit from some other source, those preschools would be covered and would fit within the definition of school of origin. So when we are making the determination about whether a student will attend the school of origin or move to the local school where they're staying, we always want to presume that keeping a student in the school of origin is in the student's best interest. So McKinney-Vento requires that it's a best interest determination that determines where the child will attend school. We're always going to lean in favor of school stability and presume that keeping the student in the school of origin is in that child's best interest, unless it's against what the parent, guardian, or youth wish. And of course, consider student-centered factors. So you can see in red on your slide the list of student-centered factors. That's been in Department of Education guidance for many, many years. Pretty much every LEA around the country has already been doing that, so it's not really a change, but it is specifically in the law now. And you can see there are some slightly different or perhaps additional best interest considerations for preschoolers, just considering their age, and also the fact that there isn't always preschool available in every school district or every area. So sometimes staying in the preschool of origin might be the difference between staying in preschool or not having any preschool services at all. As I mentioned, we're going to give priority to the request of the parent or guardian, and there's also a requirement to give priority to the request of the unaccompanied youth. And that is a little bit different because prior to the amendments, the law said that the school districts needed to consider the wishes of the unaccompanied youth. Now it's giving priority to that youth's wishes, which I think will help provide some clarity when situations come up from time to time where the parents and guardians are requesting one thing, but the unaccompanied youth is requesting something different. In that case, the school district really does need to work with that youth and honor the request of the youth. Transportation, as you all know, transportation to the school of origin is required upon request. ESSA does make an amendment to make it clear that if a student moves into permanent housing during the school year, it's always been the case that the child has the right to remain and complete that school year in the school of origin. What ESSA has changed is that now when a student finds permanent housing during the school year, if they're going to finish out that school year in their school of origin, they're also entitled to transportation to finish out that school year in the school of origin. And of course, that includes preschool as well, since preschool is now part of the definition of school of origin. The remaining transportation requirements on the slide have been in the law for a while. In addition to school of origin transportation, it is required to provide students in homeless situations with comparable transportation. So if there's an activities bus or other transportation in place for all students, of course our McKinney-Vento students need to have that transportation as well. And to look at transportation policies to make sure that those are not acting as barriers to identification or enrollment or success in school. So moving from school of origin to school enrollment when remaining in the school of origin is not in the student's best interest or what the parent, guardian, or youth requests. Of course, under McKinney-Vento, our students are entitled to immediate enrollment in any public school that students living in the same attendance area are eligible to attend. That's always been the case in McKinney-Vento for several years. That is true even when students, of course, don't have documents they need, whether that's school records, proof of residency, guardianship, records of immunization, and other required health records. It's also the case that students have missed application or enrollment deadlines during any period of homelessness. So this comes up quite often with charter schools, with magnet schools, sometimes with preschools, other specialized education programs where the deadline to enroll in that program may be in the spring to enroll for the fall. There may be a lottery that happens in April for a school that starts in August. So students who miss those deadlines during a period of homelessness need to be allowed to go ahead and enroll in those programs, apply for those programs, even if they've missed the deadline. It may be the case that the program is already at capacity, and that's going to be a barrier that is going to be very difficult to address, and we'll talk about that on a different slide. But if there's room in the program, we don't want the deadline to be the thing that's keeping that child from attending that program or that school. Enrollment, as you know, includes attending classes and participating fully in school activities. That's always been the case. And both states and LEAs are required to review and revise their policies to remove barriers. They've always been required to look at barriers to enrollment and retention, and now we have the addition of identification. So what's a barrier to identification? I think many things can fall under that topic. One question that I just got actually last week was about a practice requiring families who are staying temporarily with others to have that host family provide a signed letter notarized saying that that family was staying with them. Now, there are many reasons why a host family would not want to do that, or why the family staying with them would be afraid to even ask for that. A policy like that clearly would be a barrier to identification. It would also be a barrier to enrollment. So we have a lot of new tools in McKinney-Vento to really look at our policies and practices and make sure that they are very much aligned with McKinney-Vento and not imposing any barriers on identification, enrollment, or retention of our students in homeless situations. And that includes barriers due to outstanding fees, fines, or absences. So policies like if you miss 10 days of school, you're out for the whole semester. Or if you come to enroll in November, you can't actually attend until January because it's too late in the semester. Those policies that are related to absences or outstanding fees all need to be waived for McKinney-Vento students. Some information about full participation that comes both from the Department of Education's guidance as well as the law is related to removing barriers, as I mentioned before, to some of the specialized programs like magnet schools, career and technical education, online learning, charter schools. So there is a requirement now to eliminate barriers to those programs, and the Department of Education says that that includes anticipating the barriers and accommodating them. So I mentioned earlier about programs being at capacity. When you have charter schools or magnet schools or other programs that fill up in April for the fall, a student who comes in due to homelessness over the summer or in September or October, they have no way to access those programs. So much like Head Start programs can set aside slots for children experiencing homelessness, so can charter schools and so can other schools, particularly if they're noticing as they look at their data that they're having to turn families and children away who are experiencing homelessness because they come in late and they're not able to access the programs due to those capacity issues. So looking at giving them priority on wait lists, looking at potentially setting aside slots for them, and also looking at things like sports and extracurricular activities and making sure that children who come in late or in the middle of the school year because of homelessness are not barred from participating in those activities just because they can't meet different kinds of attendance or residency requirements. We need to eliminate those barriers for McKinney-Vento students. And additionally, there are some new provisions in McKinney-Vento that are really focusing on academic success. So we talked, of course, about enrollment and full participation, but we want to make sure McKinney-Vento students are able to be successful in school. So one important provision is that school districts and also states must have procedures in place to make sure that McKinney-Vento students can earn partial credit for coursework that they satisfactorily complete. So if they're in one school for a few weeks and then they move to another school, looking at calculating and awarding credit for the work they did over those few weeks, and then the new school accepting that credit and making an effort to see what's still missing, what classes can we put that student in so that we can piece the two schools together and make sure that they actually get full credit for that whole semester that they were in school, making sure that they can get into electives that they may have started in one school, so that they can finish them in the next school and actually get the credit for the work, and offering credit recovery. So really taking a look at that ability to piece credits together so that students can keep moving forward, particularly at the high school level, despite their mobility. In addition, as we know, the McKinney-Vento Act really doesn't overrule disciplinary policies that are in place in school districts, But the Department of Ed is really urging schools to take a look at their disciplinary policies and make sure that they are accommodating the needs of homeless students. So again, looking at some of those zero tolerance absence policies, those tardy policies, and making sure, particularly before removing children from the classroom or school through suspensions or expulsions, that positive discipline options are in place and that everything that can possibly be done is being done. We know that sometimes if a student is suspended or expelled, they don't have any place to be during the day. They certainly don't have any place safe to be. They don't have any place to have lunch. So disciplinary action can have a much deeper effect on McKinney-Vento students than it does on others. The Department of Ed also really emphasizes trauma-informed care and making sure that trauma support is part of the professional development that's being offered to schools, and that the kind of trauma that many homeless students go through is something that's really being discussed and being addressed.
All right, so now I will get into some of the higher education provisions that are part of ESSA, and they're pretty exciting to me, and I hope so for the rest of you that are on, and especially those higher education professionals. So the first thing that we will look at is the role that counselors will play in assisting homeless students as they transition to higher education. And that is that all McKinney-Vento youth must be able to receive individualized counseling from counselors to prepare and improve their readiness for college, including college selection, application, financial aid, and on-campus supports. Now, the really great thing about this is we have already outlined in some of our past webinars how to help homeless students transition and get fee waivers and to find a best fit campus. We'll do this again at our conference. I'll also be having some webinars in October that will go a little bit more in depth into this. And then even at our conference, there are some liaisons from Las Vegas, Nevada that have already started to really do this and get some extended hired help to be able to help their students. So that'll be another best practice that we can highlight. And then lastly, because we already work really closely with our college transition partners, including those from the National College Access Network, NASFA, the Financial Aid Association, and then the NACAC, the Admissions Association, we've already done webinars with them, and so you can get some best practices from us for those high school counselors and then as well from them. And then the next thing we'll look at is that liaisons must ensure unaccompanied youth are informed of their FAFSA status as independent students and obtain verification of that status. And so again, this just goes to me saying that we need to plant those seeds early, and especially because of the FAFSA time of the year is about to change, and I see so many students that slip through the cracks and they didn't receive a determination before they left school. We just want to make sure that you're letting students know as soon as they let you know that they're unaccompanied homeless youth, that they're letting you know, you're reminding them that they do have the right to access financial aid as independent students. And again, we have tools for professionals and for students on our website to assist with that. The next thing that we will look at is a local liaison may continue to make a determination of a youth status as either unaccompanied and homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless for as long as the liaison has access to that information necessary to make such a determination for a particular youth. So this is new. In the past, in a lot of our webinars and what we have been telling you is that you can, as a liaison, you can only make that determination that first year that the students transition from 12th grade to then being freshmen. We do know that occasionally some of those liaisons may know those families well. Students will have younger siblings that are still in high school or in you know, some level of secondary education, and it's not too strange for liaisons to say, hey, I've still been working with Cyekeia. I had to give her some bus tokens or, you know, find her somewhere to stay, and I know that she's still homeless. So if the liaison knows that the student is still homeless, you can continue to write the letters. For a lot of our students, that just isn't the case, and then we just have to revert back to, you know, the normal process. If a liaison does not have the information that is necessary to make the determination, either because a youth, they became homeless after high school, which we see a lot, even though I know students get sent back to you, or because the liaison is no longer familiar with the youth. I hear a lot of times liaisons will say, well, I helped Cyekeia 2 years ago. I have no clue what's going on, and she asked me to write another letter. Well, then you can't do that. You have to send the student to the financial aid office for them to get a determination. And we have been working endlessly on some of, with the higher education financial aid professionals. And of course, we have those tools and regulations and guidance all on our higher education website.
Thank you, Cyekeia. We'll come back to Cyekeia in just a couple slides, but just to sort of wrap up the ESSA section here. So turning now to Title I amendments. As Patricia outlined earlier, the McKinney-Vento amendments go into effect in just a couple weeks on October 1st. For Title I, the amendments on homelessness go into effect for the 2017-2018 school year. Some of them on the slide, just again, some of the same provisions continue. So if it's in blue, it means it's already in place. It's in place now. McKinney-Vento students attending any school in a school district they are automatically eligible for Title I. Now, what will be new is the disaggregated high school graduation and achievement data for McKinney-Vento students and also for students in foster care. That will be for the next school year. And what will be new too for 2017-18, so just to keep an eye out, is that all school districts that receive Title I-A funds will be required to set aside funds for homeless children. This means that even school districts that are entirely school-wide, they will still be required to set aside Title I funds. So just a little heads up about that particular piece of ESSA. With respect to foster care, you have here the very short version. Again, Patricia mentioned that on December 10th, awaiting foster care placement comes out of McKinney-Vento. New protections in Title I that are similar, that are about educational stability and access, they will go into effect, but they will go into effect as part of Title I Part A, and they will be in effect for all children in any stage of foster care proceedings. There is an actual official definition of child in foster care that was part of the department's guidance, and for the most part it excludes there will be a complete separation between children who meet McKinney-Vento and children who are in foster care. Also, with respect to transportation, the new policies essentially require those decisions to be made on a local level. So school districts will not be required to provide transportation to the school of origin if there are additional costs, unless they're reimbursed by the Child Welfare Agency or unless they agree to provide it. School districts will be required to work with their child welfare agencies to come up with local transportation procedures, and those local transportation procedures, again, will go into effect on December 10th. We have lots of resources on our website about that as well. And again, just to reiterate, the timing of this, December 10th is the magic date for foster care. It's when it comes out of McKinney-Vento and the new protections go into Title I. Just to let you know, we've been mentioning all these various resources on our website. For NAEHCY, for your NAEHCY one-stop shop is the link that's listed there. We've actually sort of split it up into items that are more legislative, more about professional development, more about implementation, and then about foster care. But what we do have is we have summaries of the legislation, timelines, links to the federal guidance. We have sample PowerPoints, including the Cadillac version, the complete ESSA1 PowerPoint on students with disabilities, and a brand new one that we just added the week before last about affirming HUD homeless status. That's now up on the website. Lots of training materials in terms of pop quizzes. We also have a new resource. We have a two-pager on considerations for designating McKinney-Vento liaisons that will help administrators really, what does it mean to be able to carry out duties as a liaison. So that's a brand new resource that we just put up a couple weeks ago. Again, we have a document that we wrote collaboratively with the Superintendent's Association on developing those local transportation procedures for foster youth and some sample policies. And just to let you know, I think almost every day I get an email from somebody saying, are you guys going to update your frequently asked questions document? And the answer is yes. It's almost done. We're just putting the finishing touches on it. It's a document that we did collaboratively with the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty. So you can look for that frequently asked questions, which I believe now we're up to 145 of them. that will be updated with the new law and the new guidance with the Head Start provisions. So that's coming soon, as well as some additional policies. And I'll also say too, at the very end of the PowerPoint, you've got a link to the National Center on Homeless Education. They are our very close partners. They are the Department of Ed's TA Center. And you should, if you're not on their list, get on their list. They do webinars. They'll be rolling out S materials too. So you really have many resources at your disposal as we go into this new era. With that, I turn it back over to Cyekeia.
All right, so as if October 1 is not going to be busy enough, that is when the new FAFSA comes out for the 2017-18 academic year. Now, this FAFSA used to come out January 1, so I used to always tell students Happy New Year's, Happy FAFSA time, so I can no longer say that because it's coming out in October, and I already looked this year, it's on a Saturday. But now that the FAFSA is coming out sooner, it will allow students to complete the FAFSA earlier in the academic year. So we always encourage you to have some kind of FAFSA day, or highlight tips for homeless students to complete the FAFSA, and this will also allow them to get it done at a time where they'll still have internet access to get the online application done. A lot of times over that winter break, our homeless students were kind of getting lost and they didn't have the access because they weren't enrolled or they weren't attending your schools at that time. So they can get it done earlier. It also allows them to receive financial aid award letters earlier in the academic year so they can compare award letters and choose the best fit college. So in October, they should also be applying and completing admissions applications to figure out, what college or campus they want to go to. At the same time, they can do the FAFSA, get those award letters sooner before the school year ends and say, I think I'd rather go to school B as opposed to A because A is just going to give me loans. B has some on-campus supports and other things I've looked into, and so that would be the better choice for me. And then it also allows them to submit those homeless status determinations before the school year ends. And as I mentioned before, I see so many students that are like, it's July, I didn't go to my liaison, or she's on maternity leave, or she's left, or they just didn't get the documentation. So now they have many months before they have to head off to that higher education institution to get that paperwork in. What I would encourage you to do is please work to identify those returning seniors, so those folks that were in 11th grade that you identified as unaccompanied homeless youth that are now returning. Look those names up if you can, or whoever oversees that, and then work quickly in the next few weeks to identify those new homeless seniors. I know it's a busy time of the year for all of us, but again, we don't want our homeless students to get further and further behind and then to have delays. One of the resources that the Department of Education has produced is a toolkit that kind of goes over these new FAFSA deadlines more, and there is one available for students, parents, and also counselors, and that's going to be essential since our counselors are now going to be manned with helping our homeless students complete the FAFSA. So the next thing we'll do is kind of confuse you a little bit because most folks get confused with this, but in addition to us having a new time of the year to complete the FAFSA, beginning with this new FAFSA this next month, students and parents will now need to add what we're calling prior tax information. So it's essentially tax information from 2 years ago. And I'll give you a chart in just a moment. It shouldn't be too bad for our students this year, but it does mix things up when students are completing the FAFSA. What this prior tax information does is it allows students to submit the FAFSA again earlier using past tax information. So many students have said, well, I don't know where my W-2 is, I've moved in transition, I can't remember where it's at, I haven't received it yet when January 1 rolled around. So now they get to use the tax information from 2 years prior. The one thing I'll stress is that our dependent students that are accompanied and homeless, they do have to have parental tax information on their FAFSA when they complete it. Our independent unaccompanied homeless youth do not. So they are just going to provide their own tax information from 2 years prior. For most of them, they will not have had any tax information. So they just need to plug in zeros on the FAFSA, check off that they're unaccompanied homeless youth, and not complete the parental section. Again, next month I'm going to have a higher education webinar. I haven't picked the date yet, but of course we'll get that information to you and go over this a little more. And next I want to just show you a quick chart so you'll have a better understanding of what this prior looks like along with the new FAFSA deadline. So as you will see in the third column down, on October 1, 2016, students will be using the 2015 tax information. So for our returning students, they had to use 2015 tax information already. This should be easy for them. For our new students completing the FAFSA, they don't have to wait on any other tax information, and they can just use the 2015. So hopefully this chart helps you if you're at all lost. Do share this with students and just be mindful of it as you help students complete the FAFSA. And Barbara just mentioned a one-stop shop for ESSA materials and some of our other education-related materials and documents. So I want to let you know what we have on our higher education webpage, and we've also provided a link for you in that chat box. But on our higher education webpage, we have tools for making those homeless status determinations. And again, we just did a facelift on it. So if you were on there yesterday morning, we switched things around and we put those materials that we know you need a little bit more towards the top of the page. With our determination tools, they're very easy. They already explain what unaccompanied homeless youth means. It allows you to just check a couple boxes and to put the student's information in. It does ask for a student social, but we know that a lot of colleges have moved away from that. So because it's a Word document, you have the ability to remove some of that if it's not needed. And we've already updated the dates, so you don't have to do that, but we also have the U.S. Department of Education's Dear Colleague Letter and the Application and Verification Guide that outline the college's roles and responsibilities for making those homeless status determinations. I know that a lot of us get frustrated when our students experience barriers and they're like, where's the guidance? We've put it towards the top of our higher ed webpage. What we're going to be updating is our FAFSA completion tips for youth without a home. I looked at it yesterday and I was like, this is not reflective of October 1. So even we are going to be working quickly to make sure that we get everything updated for October 1. And of course, our past higher education webinars, and we have podcasts and our toolkit, blogs that I've done on the new FAFSA release and other things higher ed. All of that information is posted there. And the last thing I will talk about is our Home for the Holidays campaign. The one thing I tell folks is that in October, that's when the helpline starts to ring with students looking for somewhere to go for the holidays. And quite honestly, it's already beginning to ring with students looking for housing during breaks. So for this campaign that we've done for the last 3 years, we work with the National Network for Youth, the National Center for Housing and Child Welfare, and Covenant House, and we just try to really highlight best practices that are happening around the country with host homes in the community or on college campuses. And so we have put up some action steps and best practices online, and then we now have an online survey to find out more about what campuses are doing. And so it's not fully open to the community just yet to find out about host home programs, but for my higher education partners that may be listening in today, please complete this. We're looking to get 100 folks right now. It's been open for some time and we only have 21. If you are in the secondary education system but you know of something going on really great in your state, because people know about things, but at NAEHCY we don't know it, and we want to be able to post that and help students. So please pass along the link for this survey. We're going to keep it open another month just so we can collect as many practices as we can, so we'll be well armed when students are looking for housing during those breaks.
All right, I think we're ready for questions. We're going to have a break now for questions, and then we just got a couple kind of resources for the very end to let you know about additional events that are coming up. But now is the time for responding. So if you haven't already typed a question in your chat box, you can do that now. And Patricia is our designated moderator. So Patricia, what do we got?
We've got a lot of great questions. So I'm going to start just kind of going back to the beginning of the presentation and start with a couple questions about Head Start for you, Barbara. You had talked about how Head Start programs can reserve slots for children experiencing homelessness, and there was a question about whether Head Start programs have required quotas that they need to fill. Do they need to keep their programs full? And how does that 3% that you mentioned play into that?
Head Start programs there's a goal of 100% enrollment. So they are funded to have X number of slots, and that they're supposed to keep it at 100%, but they are allowed in the statute to go down to 97% without penalty. And so that's where that 3% comes in. So they have the well, they have this, and again, it's something that, because they're always, the message to Head Start is, you know, you got to keep full enrollment, you got to keep full enrollment, but they do have in the statute wiggle room to go down to 97%. And now with this new regulation, they actually have explicit permission to keep the 3% for children who are homeless or in foster care. So again, and I neglected to mention this, but you know, this is huge news in the Head Start world. I mean, all of the regulations, not just the homeless piece. So, you know, they're going to be looking at a whole number of different changes to the program. It really is kind of like their ESSA. So, you know, approach them gently and positively about how you can help with all of this, but that's the general expectations around funded enrollment for Head Start.
Thank you very much. And just a clarification, can you say again, do homeless preschoolers automatically qualify for Head Start?
Yes. Children who meet the McKinney-Vento definition for homeless automatically qualify for Head Start. They do not need to prove income. It is the fact of meeting that definition that qualifies them automatically. That doesn't mean they get in, right? Because this is a program that has way more children who are eligible than it has funded spots. But it does mean that by virtue of their homelessness, they are eligible for the program, and that's all that needs to be established.
Super. Thank you for that clarification. And one last question on Head Start before we move forward to a different topic. About transportation, kind of a Part A and a Part B. Part A, is there a distance limitation on Head Start transportation? So we're not talking about school districts here, but just Head Start. And then what about programs where there's a Head Start program that's actually being administered by a school district? Are we doing the Head Start regulations? Are we doing McKinney-Vento? How does that work?
Well, with the first question about sort of the distance on transportation, I will confess that I did not read every word of the 100-page regulations. There's an entire section on transportation. So the short answer to that one is I don't know. But if the questioner would put in their email address, I would be happy to find out. It's again, this could not be any newer and coming out yesterday or announced last week, so I would be happy to look that up. Again, there are some pretty specific regulations around transportation for Head Start programs, so I don't know if distance and time is addressed in that or not. With respect to the second question, if an LEA is administering a Head Start program, the Head Start program is essentially following both laws. It is definitely following McKinney-Vento in terms of it being a school of origin, the transportation requirements. So it's following that part of McKinney-Vento for sure. Everywhere preschool is in McKinney-Vento, it means the Head Start program if it's operated by the school district. And of course, as a Head Start program, it also will be following the Head Start performance standards as well. We have one of the things that I just sent off to Patricia today for her draft, and we will have done in the next couple weeks, is a side-by-side, McKinney-Vento and Head Start. So across categories, definition, identification, enrollment, transportation, stability. So you will literally be able to look at a glance and see what each one says and cite chapter and verse there. So that's something we hope to get to shortly, because there will be programs that have blended funding that are following multiple laws.
Thanks, Barbara. I'll try to address a couple of questions on McKinney-Vento and ESSA now, and then we also have a few questions on higher ed for Cyekeia as well. So just following up on the transportation question and that issue, you know, in terms of distance, someone did ask, is there a distance limit for transportation to the school of origin under McKinney-Vento? And that one we do know the answer to, and that answer is no. There is no distance limitation on transportation to the school of origin. School of origin is really based upon the best interest of the student. So certainly there will be commutes that will just be too long to be in that child's best interest, and commutes that could interfere with safety or with the child's ability to be awake and to attend in class. But there's no mileage or number of minutes or hours limit on transportation. And that's going to be the same whether that school district or school normally provides transportation to students or not. The requirement to provide transportation to the school of origin is a flat requirement under McKinney-Vento. If it's in the child's best interest to attend that school, transportation must be provided regardless of what is or is not in place for other students in the school district. We had another question about transportation that is one that I haven't heard before, and so Barbara, you might want to weigh in on this too. But regards to transportation until the end of the school year, which is now required when children move into permanent housing, if they're going to stay in their school of origin for the rest of that year, they need to be transported to that school of origin. So the question was, several preschools are year-round. So what does the end of the year really mean in that context? I'm guessing that the preschool has some kind of a definition of a beginning and an end of a particular curriculum or a particular cycle or program. So you'd really probably need to look at what does that mean in the context of that particular preschool. And that's the same for regular schools, not preschools, but K-12 schools that are year-round. When does somebody sort of move from one grade to the next or from one classroom or age level to the next? That's probably going to be considered to be the end of the year. I don't know if you have anything else on that one, Barbara. I'm not sure that's one that we've really talked about a lot.
No, other than to say that there are usually still academic years or some sort of annual cycle that programs have. So I would look to that first, but it may be different depending on the program.
Thank you. I'll try one more on ESSA, and then we'll have some on higher from Cyekeia. Also, if we don't answer your question out loud, take a look in the chat box, scroll up, because I did type a number of answers into that chat box. So see if we may have typed some of those in there, particularly if you asked your question towards the end of the presentation. Another question is to talk a little bit more about holding slots for charter schools. Would that have to be addressed in their plans and needs assessments? And I think that's a really good and complex question, and probably goes into the category of things that we kind of have to see how this is going to work out in implementation, considering that the ESSA amendments haven't even really gone into effect yet. But probably what needs to happen in terms of reserving slots for charter schools would be absolutely making that part of the needs assessment. So looking at how many students are experiencing homelessness in the service area of the charter school, how many are trying to apply. Many charter schools have services that in many ways are particularly appropriate for students who are highly mobile or going through different kinds of challenges at home or other issues. So looking at what are we offering, how many students experiencing homelessness are trying to get in, how many are returning away, and how can we make that part of our needs assessment. And of course, looking at the charter itself, if there are certain kinds of attendance requirements similar to what Head Start has, trying to address those and accommodate those. So I certainly don't expect this to be something that happens this year, but it would be great for it to be something that charter schools started to think about this year so that they could be ready to do it for next year potentially. So we can come back to a couple more ESSA questions later, but I want to make sure that we are leaving some time for our higher education questions. So Cyekeia, we've got a few for you here. One is, what happens if a student submits the FAFSA and becomes an unaccompanied homeless youth after they've already submitted? How do they do an amendment or a redetermination process?
Got it. Great question. So a student won't be able to change the homeless status online on the FAFSA at that point if they've already submitted a FAFSA as a dependent student, and what they would then need to do is go into the financial aid office and communicate to the financial aid administrator that there has been a change in their situation. If they're still in high school, then of course all the supplemental documentation that they can get will help. And even if they're out of high school, but they've been working with a caseworker or something like that, at that point it could be deemed conflicting information because they checked one thing and now they're coming in to say something different. But the point I'll stress is that student situations change all the time, especially when you're working with vulnerable youth. So, they can't change it on their own, but they can go into the financial aid office and the financial aid administrator can change it for them.
Thank you. That's very helpful. We've got a question that you may or may not know the answer to, Cyekeia, because it's really specific to New York. Do you know if there are SPOC, single points of contact, at community colleges and SUNY campuses in New York? To what extent have they kind of implemented that model in New York?
So I can kind of answer this. On Point for College in New York has worked with several campuses in the state in the SUNY and CUNY system to create what they are calling Campus Angels. Feel free to email me and I can connect you to those folks if you aren't already connected. I don't personally know who all of those SPOCs are or if they're at you know, SUNY or CUNY campuses. But there is some variations out there, and they're called those campus angels. So just check with me, and then I'll connect you to some folks that would know a little bit more.
That's great. Thank you. And we've got one more higher ed question for you too so far. Someone has a little bit of frustration because she's using kind of a template letter for verifying homelessness for students that she's working with, and she's sending those letters to the local colleges, and then they're coming back and they're saying, oh, but we want it on our letter. So she's got to kind of do the whole thing again, and there's really no difference. It's just maybe there's, you know, a T cross and an I dotted a little bit different. So is there any kind of a movement, I guess, let's say, to try to say that, you know, as long as you've got the information that you need on the letter, just accept what we send you, and we don't want to have to go back again, and then the youth has to come back to us, and we need to complete a new form?
Got it. So I did see that comment and I smiled because I know where it's coming from and I feel your frustration. The one thing I will say is that continue to send me those emails and those examples so I can forward them to the Federal Student Aid Policy staff. I am always on board to advocate with you and, you know, forward emails and guidance to say, hey, you don't have to make them do anything else. And the Dear Colleague letter and the Chapter 5 of the Application and Verification Guide on our website, it says the liaison's word is sufficient no matter, you know, how it comes about. I continue to take those frustrations to FSA, but the more that you can send them to me, the more that I can let them know, hey, this isn't going away. If we do want them to intervene, they will need the student's permission, so it can get bogged down at some point, but just continue to let me know about those examples so we can keep it on their radar, and hopefully we can just continue to work with our higher education partners to make a change. So there is a movement going. It's going to take some time. Just keep letting me know those barriers when you come across them.
Thanks, Cyekeia. I am going to throw something back at Barbara, I think. A question about, we talked about eliminating barriers to identification, enrollment, and retention in school, including barriers related to unpaid fees, fines, and absences. So there's a question about absences, and the question is, how do we waive attendance requirements when the state is setting attendance requirements that, you know, after a student misses a certain number of days, there's some kind of a truancy referral, or, you know, the state is setting standards about attendance and truancy, etc. Any suggestions for how to deal with that?
I would contact your state coordinator ASAP, because that requirement about removing barriers caused by absences actually a requirement for SEAs and LEAs, not just LEAs. So such a policy, either the state would need to make a formal exception or otherwise communicate to school districts that if the absence is caused by homelessness, then that policy does not hold. And I don't know, is that we have that, I think, the site in the PowerPoint where it says SEAs and LEAs. So essentially that obligation to revise those policies is at both at the state and the local level.
Thank you. I think that was really helpful. There's a question kind of getting into some of the details about the definition of preschool in McKinney-Vento, what preschools are covered and what are not. And we know that that's a big issue and a big question that a lot of people are having. So what I'm actually going to do right now is I'm going to paste into the chat box the answer to that question that is going to be in our FAQ that Barbara mentioned, that's going to be coming out in a couple of weeks here. As I said, the term preschool actually is not defined in the McKinney-Vento Act or in the Department of Education guidance. But what we do have is guidance from the Department of Education about McKinney-Vento data collection. And what does the term preschool mean for data collection for McKinney-Vento, which it would seem to make sense that if we're going to collect data on them, that means that is a preschool under the definition that the Department of Ed is using. So I actually just paste that entire definition into the chat box, as well as the link to where you can see it and look at it yourself. But it's a pretty broad definition, and it's really looking at any preschool program that is in whole or in part either funded or administered by the local educational agency. So I think that when we really start to break it down, obviously a preschool that's 100% private, all through private funds, provided through a faith community or something else, that's certainly not going to be covered by the McKinney-Vento Act, since McKinney-Vento only covers public schools. But a lot of the preschools that have mixed funding streams, state funds, Title I funds, certainly preschool special education, those probably will be covered. They look to be pretty clearly covered by the definition. And so hopefully reading through that language will help address that particular question. With that, I think we've addressed most of the questions that are in the chat box, either on the phone or actually typing the answer into the chat box. I think the only question that I have here that's still outstanding, and Barbara, I think, and Cyekeia, both of you, I think, would have some feedback on this one. It's about online schools, and for students experiencing homelessness, we know that they don't often have reliable internet, but at the same time, we also know that online education programs sometimes can be really great for them. So when we look at online schools, are there any resources that you can point us to? Does the McKinney-Vento Act apply to online schools? And how can we make sure that if that is in the child's best interest or the youth's best interest, that they're getting access to the internet? Any thoughts or best practices for us on that one?
I'm trying to remember if it's addressed in the guidance. Patricia, do you remember if virtual learning is addressed in the guidance? I am drawing a blank right now.
I don't remember anything specific. I know that the National Center for Homeless Education, I believe, has a brief on that, and I'm going to try to find the link for that right now, and I will post it into our little chat box if I can find it.
I mean, I know that, for example, certain states, and Colorado was one of them, a lot of questions came up last year about online schools and the applicability of McKinney-Vento to virtual learning. And I do know that, the Department of Education did get involved, but they were very wary about sort of setting sort of firm rules down, given how variable those programs are. So I'm afraid I don't have, well, Patricia sort of digs away there. I don't have any sort of great I can't point to anything official, put it that way, in terms of how online programs. I do know that the Department of Ed did consider the virtual learning program to be a school of origin, and they did get involved. So there is some applicability, but it varies.
And the only thing I can add, I know this is going to vary in terms of resources from state to state, and it's not directly tied to McKinney-Vento, but some cable providers and internet providers will allow students who receive free and reduced lunch a discount on internet services, or I think it may be as minimal as $10, but that's just from commercials and things that I've seen. So I would just say check with your local state providers to see if they have any internet resources for students on free and reduced lunch, which would include our McKinney-Vento students.
Great. I actually didn't find that publication on NCHE's website, so I'm thinking maybe they didn't actually ever publish it as a final version. But in the Department of Education's guidance, it's actually question I-6 that deals not really in a lot of depth about online learning, but it does have something to say, so it might be worth looking at I-6 in the guidance and just seeing if that provides any help at all. But I think with that, we can go back to the presentation, and I know that you have some additional resources to share. So let's go ahead and do that, and if you have other questions, feel free to type them in, and we can always respond to you via email later.
The next slide, just in case you missed it, in June, Civic Enterprises and Hart Research Associates released really a groundbreaking report on the education of students experiencing homelessness. Grad Nation published it. They continue to be involved in getting the word out about this report. It's groundbreaking because not only is it based on interviews with homeless youth, it's also based on interviews with homeless liaisons. So as you are doing your ESSA trainings and awareness, would really encourage you to look at this, include some of the findings. When you look, for example, at the ESSA PowerPoints that on the NAEHCY website, you will see that we pulled findings from this report because they help provide the context for why McKinney-Vento and ESSA is so important with some new research. So there's the link that, just to give you some examples, they also, the folks at Grad Nation, America's Promise are amazing with their graphics. So they have these great kind of infographics that you can download as part of their digital toolkit, whether you want to include them in a PowerPoint, an email, a presentation. So this is one of the findings of the students they interviewed. Homelessness was something they experienced more than once. So the stereotype that people experience homelessness once and then they're done didn't hold true. Almost half said they were homeless both with a parent and by themselves. Again, the silos that we continue to try to put people in don't hold true if you looked at the lived experience of youth. 94% stayed with other people, half slept outside in a public place. So that's just one example. You can see the hashtag unseen students. They're also masters at social media campaigns. So that's one. And then just one more to share with you. These are sort of the kind of infographics that they've prepared, just to let you know that that's available. I thought this one was pretty powerful too. So that's the Hidden in Plain Sight report. Also want to make a plug for our conference coming up shortly. We are in Orlando. We have over 90 sessions this year, our biggest conference offerings yet. If you want to see exactly what's being offered, you can go on our website. We now have the concurrent sessions listed, those descriptions, so you can look and see what's going to be offered in all of these areas from K-12, early childhood, higher education, a lot on housing partnerships. So just to let you know that is there. I think we hit the 800 mark today. So we're now at 800, and I'm pretty sure we're going to get bigger than last year. Last year we had 1,200 people. So it'll be a really unique and historic conference. I would love to have you there. And then just really lastly, to let you know how to stay in touch with us when new resources come out, new materials. Certainly we now have an e-newsletter. It's monthly. It just comes out once a month. So if you want to get the e-newsletter, you can sign up there. There's another spot to sign up for legislative alerts. That's a different list. So e-newsletter once a month, a little bit more in depth. Legislative alerts and webinars is a different list. And of course, Facebook. That's the quickest way to find out. We will, for example, we are recording this webinar. We will archive it. So if you want to come back to it, or colleagues who were not able, we sold out. we filled up with this one. So whenever we archive materials, we'll put that up on that Facebook page as well. So just to make that connection for you there. And whoops, I went back too far. Our email addresses are on the very first slide. So we are all pretty obsessive compulsive emailers. You have our contact information there too. With that, Patricia, are there any more questions?
No, I didn't see anything new come in the chat box, so I think we're good to go.
Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.